Hello, Tamal, and welcome back to the Business Standard Banking Show. In this week's column, which is aptly titled Pay Them Well, Give Them a Break on Saturdays, you argue that an industry wide wage pact may not be the best thing. Why do you say so?
No, it's certainly, it is been. I stand by what I have written. It's now what 1960s, 66 before nationalization. This wage pact started, and as we speak, 2023, the profile of the banks have changed. The banks are treating themselves like tech companies. The expertise that required from the employees and the officers, the workmen and the officers, are very different than what it was. What happened, the problem with the industry-wide wage pact is this: the you go by the ability of the weaker banks, that because it's the benchmark, everything is it's all applicable to all banks. So you don't go by the better banks who are more profitable, who can afford more, because if you do that, then the weaker banks will not be able to match that. So that's the key issue with this. Of course, as we speak, banking sector is sort of, to use a cliche, is in pink of health. Public sector banks also I'm talking about. They are pretty well capitalized. The NPAs are pretty low. And if you see fiscal year 2023, their combined net profit rose beyond 1 trillion. So it's very good time. But the key question is it the time actually to look at things in a different way? If not at all, if you don't want to, break it. My understanding is this: there have been in the past occasions when a few banks wanted to break away, but ultimately it did not happen. The IBA, the premier bankers body, and the trade unions, they discuss and they come up with this 15% kind of addition they get. I mean, the raise they get, etc. But in this situation, can you actually compete with the private banks? Because what we are saying, despite consolidation, public sector banks' incremental share in both deposits and loans, you will see it's been going down. So how do you attract talent, particularly if you see at a fairly senior level? At the junior level, when a so-called provisionary officer starts his or her career in a public sector bank, he or she is much better looked after than private banks, apart from the security of job. But as they go up, from chief manager onwards, you see the gap between public and private sector banks widens, and of course it widens too much at the most senior level for the CEO. But that's a separate story altogether, because their salaries are linked to the IAS cadre. I mean, these guys are dealing with money, the bankers, and the bureaucrat job are very different. Why do you link that? That's a separate story altogether. But even for the workmen, that is the clerical staff and the executives, the officers, I think we need to have a different approach, particularly at this among the officers, at the relatively senior level. You need to pay them better. And probably other part is this: why don't you shift to the CTC concept, that the cost to company concept? Because what we prima facie see, the salary that's at every level in the public sector bank, it's not exactly everything. In addition to that, they get many other benefits. So why don't you monetize everything, be transparent, and be competitive? That's all. Now, once you do that, at the same time, the recruitment process, etc., also needs to change. I mean, you can't just give them more money, at the same more security, everything else you can't give them on a platter. So actually, you need to approach the thing in a HR approach has to be different, right from the recruitment policy to the payment. That's the argument I have made if you want to make public sector banks competitive.
Right. So, Tamal, as you say, the profile of banks has changed and they are in pink of health. Maybe this is the right time to actually do this. But is everything really fine? Of course, I'm drawing your attention to Shaktikanta Das, the central bank governor's meeting with the head of public and private sector banks, and him asking them to focus on corporate governance. So is there something here below the surface that you should be worried about?
Yes, if not worried, I think when the banks are doing pretty well, Reserve Bank of India has adopted the right approach. It's time to take a close look at the corporate governance. You see the quality of boards. That's one part of it, and the other part of is how independent are they, particularly in the private banks? Not in all private banks, but in some of the private banks, you will find that the board of directors, the so-called independent directors, are not actually independent. It's the CEO who has the last word. Now, public sector banks have a different, other different issues altogether, because they are primarily owned by the government, and the government as a dominant shareholder, does certain things which are again not exactly in tune with the corporate governance. So the issues are different both in public and private. In public sector, the origin of the issue is primarily the government ownership. As you all know, that banks are subjected to the dual regulations, actually one by Reserve Bank of India and one by the dominant shareholder government. I think it should end. It should end. There's a governance issue there. And private banks, as far as private banks are concerned, I think it's a quality of board. That's the worry of the Reserve Bank of India.
And now, staying on the topic of RBI, I have to ask you this question. Has tomato soured RBI's inflation arithmetic?
Yes, sort of. I could say that the food inflation again is becoming an issue, as you said. The June inflation is higher than what it was May, and analyst perception is this: in July and August, the inflation will go up further. Now, if you see the last RBI policy, RBI is pretty cautious. It stuck to its status quo, and saying that whatever needs to be done, we'll continue to do it. It did not even change the stance. And there was a very minor change, I think 10 basis point change in its inflation outlook. Now, as we speak, Reserve Bank of India has been preparing for the MPC next meeting, which will happen in August. And if you see the last bulletin, which is a June bulletin that has come in July, towards the conclusion part, the bulletin says this clearly: we are keeping a very close watch on inflation. In the fight against inflation is not yet over.
So it seems the pause will continue for long. Thank you, Tamal, for joining us.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.
I am the blue of the limitless sky. I am the inspiration that led success soar high. I will achieve, I will fly high. I am the I in SBI.
I'm backed by the nation's trusted bank, SBI, the banker to every Indian.